Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. As 2021 nears its end, Pakistan's leaders may be reflecting on the wisdom of that old adage about being careful what you wish for. Islamabad has long aided and abetted the Afghan Taliban, and now they are back in power. America's regional power is diminished. China, Pakistan's close ally, is still making massive investments. So does this all add up to good news for Pakistan? Well, not necessarily. My guest is National Security Advisor Moeed Yusuf. Just how secure is Pakistan? Moeed Yusuf in Islamabad, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I think it's fair to say it's been a tumultuous year in your neighborhood, and obviously the big headline is that the Taliban are back in power in Afghanistan. Do you think that has enhanced or diminished Pakistan's security?
Well, frankly, it depends how responsibly the international community plays the future. We have a situation in Afghanistan. I'm sorry I have to object to your opening. You're presenting this as if Pakistan was behind this and it's Pakistan's doing. We didn't aid and abet anybody. There was a policy employed by the US and others who were in Afghanistan. That was always a failing policy. The only country that kept saying, you will not find a military solution to this problem was Pakistan. Our advice was not heeded too. We kept saying negotiate from a position of strength. We weren't listened to. We were blamed. We were scapegoated. And the result is in front of you. So first of all, I want to be clear. The facts should be what they are.
No, I thank you for that. I mean, facts are important. But when I said aided and abetted, I was really alluding to the fact that senior Taliban leaders lived quite openly in Quetta in Pakistan. We know that Taliban fighters crossed into Afghanistan over many years from Pakistan. We know that actually wounded Taliban fighters were treated in medical centers inside Pakistan. So if that doesn't represent long-term assistance, I'm not sure what does.
Stephen, I just hope one day the West introspects, because if the West doesn't, or any country doesn't, we're going to end up in the same cycle again. Pakistan was not the one that brought the war to Afghanistan. Pakistan is the principal victim of this war. We didn't have suicide bombings in our country before 9/11. Since 9/11, over 80,000 casualties of Pakistanis, which the West just likes to wish away, over $150 billion lost in the economy, 3.5 million internally displaced people, millions of Afghan refugees. Do you think we are mad that we would be abetting something that is bringing this kind of disaster to my country? So, I think we've got to be real. Yes, these accusations came, and we kept explaining to the world that the reason the Kabul government keeps saying this is that they are corrupt, incompetent, and Western taxpayers' money is being misused. Nobody listened to us. That narrative was brought by the West, and today there is an embarrassment where Western taxpayers are asking their government on where the money went. We had no interest in the way this war went on, the disaster and the casualties that we faced, and the way it ended. We are the country, by the way, we are the country, Stephen, that has been recognized by the US and UK and others for facilitating the Doha peace process, the end point of which should have been a genuinely inclusive government. It was because the Afghan president decided to up and leave his country. It was because the army that was trained never fought that the end result was what it was. So please stop blaming Pakistan, because I've got to tell you.
Well, you're reading a lot into my questions here. I'm not blaming anybody, but I am seeking to find out what your strategic analysis is right now. Imran Khan, your prime minister, said after the Taliban took over in Kabul, he said, quote, "We must strengthen and stabilize the current government," that is the new Taliban government, "for the sake of the people of Afghanistan." I just wonder if you still feel feel that same way? Now that you've seen the Taliban in power for, what, 4 or 5 months, does that sentiment still hold good?
Stephen, I have got a 1,600-mile border with Afghanistan. I've got 4 years of experience where 4 million refugees are still in Pakistan after 40 years. Compare this to the European reaction and the British reaction and the American reaction to one refugee that shows up to your shores. I have an experience that tells me that the moment Afghanistan is unstable, my country will be unstable. It's been a porous border for centuries. Refugees flow over, terrorism flows over, drugs flow over. So what the Prime Minister of Pakistan said was, any government, we want Afghanistan to be stable, because if Afghanistan heads towards instability and collapse, Pakistan will be harmed and hurt the very next day. And as Pakistan's national security advisor, it is my right to tell the world, as Pakistan's Prime Minister, it's his right to tell the world that the way the international community is approaching Afghanistan, it's headed for a collapse. And if it does, we are going to hurt in Pakistan. So it's my right to explain this. I am telling you that
I hear the message loud and clear, but the reality on the ground is this. If I may just quite quickly paint you a picture, we have a country that is slipping very fast into massive humanitarian economic crisis. We have a government which, far from promises to be inclusive, is very much not inclusive, not in terms of ethnicity, but still less in terms of including any women. We have a government that promised to let girls go to school, but in many, many parts of Afghanistan, secondary school age girls are not able to get an education. And finally, we have a government which includes within its senior ministries at least one individual who is wanted by the United States as a terrorist. And you know I'm talking about Mr. Haqqani. So given what we now know about this Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, I come back to the question, does Pakistan still want to support and enhance that government?
If you don't like 30 people, make sure that 30 million die. This is what you're saying. Just understand the connotation of what you're saying. I'm not here to defend the Taliban. The world should go and have a conversation with them. Our message to the Taliban is identical to what the world is saying. More inclusivity, human rights for all, no terrorism from Afghan soil. This is what we want. Why would I want anything else for people of Afghanistan than what I want for my own people in Pakistan? So that's not up for debate. The issue, Stephen, is something different. You talk about facts on the ground. Let me tell you the facts. The UNDP head in Afghanistan says this is the worst economic crisis and humanitarian disaster we have ever witnessed. Quote, end quote. 22.8 million people are facing acute food shortage. 70% are apportioning food. 1 million children are acutely malnourished. That's the reality I have to deal with in Pakistan, because if this goes on any further, I am going to have a serious refugee problem. I am going to have a situation where international terrorist organizations are going to get more space. But leave this aside. Just let me ask you a very simple ethical and moral question. There is a government that many don't like. It's not recognized. It's fought a war against many countries. But there are 35 to 40 million Afghans who have nothing to do with this. So let's at least agree that they need to be fed immediately. And here is where I must tell you very candidly that I am increasingly reaching the conclusion that the world probably doesn't care. Because at this point, it's not a problem of money. It's not a problem of pledges. Everybody's pledged money. Why isn't the money getting there? Because the banking channels are not being allowed to function. The UN can't get money in. The ICRC can't get money in. When you can't get money in, how are you going to feed people? Pakistan is the country that helped more than anybody else. 49,000 people evacuated from Pakistan of 75 countries. We have created a land and air bridge to Afghanistan, asking the world to channel whatever aid they want from us free of cost. But no money can be brought. The UN is crying. The ICRC is complaining. Why? Why are we doing this with the Afghan people?
Mr. Yusuf, you speak very powerfully about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. I now want to turn to the strategic implications of what's happening in Afghanistan for Pakistan. It is very interesting to me that the Taliban Afghan foreign minister said recently that he and his government have been mediating between your government and the PTT, the Pakistani Taliban. Do you think it is wise to get the Afghan Taliban to become the middleman broker in negotiations between you and your insurgent jihadist Taliban force within Pakistan's borders?
It's not a middleman issue. They are ruling the country, and the TTP leadership is all in Afghanistan. This is a group that has killed thousands of Pakistanis. We know that. No Pakistani has been unaffected by terrorism by them, either directly or indirectly. This is a group that was supported by our arch rival India and the Afghan intelligence, unfortunately, under Ashraf Ghani, to perpetrate terrorism in Pakistan. So if there is anybody who should be worried about this, it's Pakistan and Pakistanis.
Many, if I may interrupt, many Pakistanis are very worried. Indeed, we heard the worries voiced within the Supreme Court when they were actually grilling your Prime Minister Imran Khan about what was going on in terms of these negotiations. And I think one of the justices alluded to the 2014 terrible atrocity where the PTT launched an attack on an army school and killed more than 130 children. And the justice said this to Mr. Khan. He said, is the government going to sign a document of defeat with those who killed these children? Are we going to surrender once again? What is the answer to that?
The first answer is you should recognize the state of democracy in this country, that the judge calls in the Prime Minister, who goes and gets grilled, and now Stephen Sackur has the opportunity to ask me. That's the state of democracy. I'm proud of that. Now, to your question of TTP, you're absolutely right. So there are parents who lost children. There are brothers who lost sisters. There are sons who lost fathers. There are tribes who have a problem because their tribes were wiped out. All of these people will have to be taken into confidence. But first, understand what we are trying to do. We have a consistent policy as a state to say that negotiations must end conflicts and negotiations must happen from a position of strength. This is what we told the Americans and the UK and others for 20 years in Afghanistan. I wish they would have listened. What's the situation now? TTP's lifeline was the support they were getting from India and the Afghan intelligence. That lifeline is gone. They coexisted with the Afghan Taliban in Afghanistan. They have contacts. Third, we are in a position of strength because we know that they are reeling at this moment. So what are we saying? If they are apologizing, if they are willing to go through the due process of the court of law in Pakistan, live under the constitution of Pakistan, get punished for whatever crimes that have taken place, renounce violence forever, we want to hear what they're saying.
But hang on, it's not just a question of hearing what they're saying. According to reports in the Pakistani media, it is reported that you've already undertaken prisoner releases, including, according to some reports, some senior cadres of the Pakistani Taliban have been released as part of the short-term ceasefire deal. Is that true?
First of all, that is not true.
Have you released any prisoners?
No. And if you allow me to finish the question, finish the answer, please. What I'm explaining to you is, we're hearing them out on whether they are serious about this or not, because there are families, there are kids, their wives and children, thousands of Pakistanis who may be linked with them in one way or another, but a state's job is not to kill another Pakistani. We are going to try our level best to ensure that Pakistani citizens are safe without any more blood being spilt on either side. If that doesn't work, the state has all the options open. But it is every state's right. In fact, frankly, it's rational and it's smart to end conflicts through dialogue from a position of strength. That's what the Pakistani state has always stood for. That said, I think the media reporting on this is very hype. There's really nothing there at this point. If there is, trust me, you will know, and the entire world will know when we have to tell them.
Let's talk other strategic challenges and decisions that you and the Pakistan government face. You know the United States very well. You worked there for years in different think tanks. You now, as your job advising Prime Minister Imran Khan, have to consider where Pakistan-US relations are going. I would put it to you that right now they are more damaged than at any time in the last few decades. In fact, am I right in saying that Joe Biden has not yet bothered to make a direct phone call to your boss, Prime Minister Imran Khan? He's been in office for almost a year now.
Yes, that's correct. He hasn't called. If he wants to, we'll consider the call. If he doesn't, it's up to him. That's not a reflection of the entirety of the relationship. Let me explain. US-Pakistan relationship has always had these ups and downs. We come together very closely, we become allies, and then unfortunately, when whatever the US interest was is fulfilled, Pakistan has been basically sidelined and actually in the 90s sanctioned. A mistake that the US acknowledged was a big blunder and should not happen again. At this point, actually, we do have a very good bilateral dialogue, but I think the mistrust over Afghanistan, the mistrust over Afghanistan still remains.
Yeah, well, so you call it mistrust. You call it mistrust. 22 Republican senators want to see Pakistan actively punished for its relationship with the Taliban. We saw Donald Trump cutting military aid. We now see the prospect that Pakistan may see other forms of assistance and aid cut from the United States when your economy is in a parlous state. You can't really afford this current toxic relationship with Washington, can you?
Look, I'm a proponent, and Pakistan is a proponent of good relations with the US. It's our largest export market. We've got millions of Pakistanis there. We have no interest in spoiling this relationship, and that's the conversation we continue to have with the US. Yes, there is mistrust, and the 22 Republicans or whatever you're talking about is a part of domestic politics that I have no say on at this time. The real issue is the administration of the US is engaged with us. I would want the situation to move faster in terms of a broad-based relationship. We are engaged, we are talking. Both sides understand they can't do without the other. But we are the biggest proponents of having a good relationship with the US. There's no question about that.
Right, but as a strategic thinker with real influence and power now in Pakistan, is it your contention that Pakistan does need to continue to shift its priority away from the relationship with the United States toward the very close relationship, particularly economic relationship you have forged with China? Is that the future for Pakistan?
I don't think it's an either or. So let me just explain to you. Pakistan's made a major transition in its own approach and thinking from a geostrategic paradigm to a geoeconomic paradigm. Both continue, of course, for every country. We look at ourselves as a melting pot for global economic interests now. And one of the key pillars for that is connectivity. The other one is development partnerships. So we want the entire world to come and coexist in Pakistan in terms of economics. We are no longer in the business of offering military bases, but our economic bases are open for all. And the US is included, the China is included.
Well, if I may say so, you're offering bases to China. That is the port of Gwadar in Balochistan, which, frankly, in terms of China's strategic interest in the long run, is a massive infrastructure strategic commitment that you've made to China. You get something like $60 billion worth of investment because of your infrastructure deal, long-term deal with the Chinese. And I just wonder whether you're happy to sacrifice certain principles in pursuit of this relationship with China. And I'm thinking in particular of your government's refusal to condemn China for what it's doing to the Muslim Uyghur minority in Xinjiang province. Your ambassador to Beijing in the summer went to Xinjiang and said he was impressed by the social harmony and preservation of the local culture, including a focus on religious harmony and freedom. What's happened to Pakistan standing up for Muslims around the world?
First of all, let me just explain. Yes, $60 billion, and that's what friends are for. We have a very, very critical strategic relationship with China. I've always had it, and our relationship is going from strength to strength. But that is not at the cost of any other country. That's what a geoeconomic paradigm is. As far as Gwadar is concerned, let me just clarify this. There are no bases in Gwadar if you're talking of military bases. Yes, there are economic bases. We've offered the same to the US, same to the Middle East, same to Russia. Anybody who wants to come and invest in Pakistan, we are open. So yes, absolutely, we want economic investment. China is a great friend, and it's done that. There's no question about it. But this is not close to anybody else. The China-Pakistan economic corridor is what? It's energy infrastructure and road infrastructure. Anybody can come and benefit from that and invest in Pakistan. As far as the other part of your question is concerned, I'm amazed at how many times this conversation comes up. But there's never a thought about all the human rights issues with Muslims and others that Pakistan keeps raising. If you have an issue...
Believe me, I'm very aware that you raise the rights of
Let-
Kashmiri people all of the time. Of course you do, in your difficult relationship with India. That's topic number one. I get that. But I'm just wondering whether it doesn't look like a double standard to you, let alone the rest of the world, when you insist on human rights in Kashmir, but you do not raise human rights with the Chinese when it comes to the Muslim minority in Xinjiang. What is going on?
So I will tell you what's going on. Let me answer. Number one, when I talk about Kashmir, Stephen, I'm talking about my people, not foreign people. I'm talking about an illegally occupied territory recognized as a dispute by the UN, and it is my right to speak about my people. I'm not speaking about any foreign country at that point in time. That's number one. As far as the question about China is concerned, Xinjiang, not only our ambassador in Beijing, but there have been teams who've gone from here. We have a relationship of trust with China where we're completely open. They give us access. We do not accept the Western description of Xinjiang. That said, if the West has concerns, you have every right, talk to China. It's a sovereign country. Please go ahead and raise your concerns. As far as I'm concerned, my position is clear. I don't accept the view from the West.
Yep.
But on Kashmir, I am sorry. It is not a double standard. I am talking about my people. You want to talk about that? I'm available.
Mr. Yusuf, that's very clear. We're almost out of time. I'm fascinated by your concept of my people. Your people also, many of them, live in the yellow province behind you on the map, Balochistan. You are National Security Advisor. What are you doing to get transparency, accountability, justice, and the truth for the thousands of men and boys who have been forcibly disappeared in Balochistan in recent years? We know it from a whole host of independent and UN investigations. You're National Security Advisor. What are you doing about it?
Every single incident is investigated. Overwhelming majority are found to be those who were terrorists or in heinous crimes who went and fought somewhere and unfortunately died. If there is any issue, any incident in which we see an excess having been committed, we will respond as a responsible state does. On top of that, let me also tell you, the biggest development packages by this government have been to provinces and people who were underdeveloped, and Balochistan is number one on the list. The highest amount of money ever given for development to all people of Balochistan is under this government. But if there is any kind of excess in the government anywhere, we will, of course, investigate.
Well, interesting use of the conditional if. Are you telling me that for all of the exhaustive human rights reporting, you do not accept that there are grave abuses in Balochistan?
I do not accept your term grave. What I am telling you is that if there are any issues which we find where the state had anything that it did, it shouldn't have, the person responsible is always investigated and then prosecuted as any responsible state would do. And that's what states do. No state is perfect. But no, I do not accept the fact that there are grave excesses happening all the time. Overwhelming majority of the cases quoted are ones that were fighting the state or somewhere else, which the West didn't like either, and unfortunately went and did what they did and did not make it or did not survive. That is the reporting and that's the investigation we have. But let me tell you, Stephen, you know, so much of this is discussed. Ultimately, the commitment of the Pakistani state, if I talk about geoeconomics, I have to have peace at home, peace in the neighborhood. We are committed to that, and we are working on every single inch of our territory to ensure that the most vulnerable Pakistani citizen is as secure as it can be.
Moeed Yusuf, I'm sorry to cut you short, but we have to end there. I thank you very much indeed for joining me on Hard Talk.
It's a pleasure.